Hi, my name is Tasha Hubbard, and I'm a filmmaker and associate professor at the University of Alberta and a supporter of the Buffalo Treaty. Um, I'm Cree from Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 in what's now known as Saskatchewan. And throughout the time that I've been doing Buffalo research and pursuing Buffalo stories, um, we've all met a number of really interesting people who are doing important work around Buffalo restoration and raising Buffalo consciousness, as Leroy would say it. I'm really pleased to be a part of this discussion today. Mary-Eve, maybe you can go next.
Yeah, thank you, Tasha. And I've been also supporters and working with the Buffalo for the last decade. So my name is Marie-Eve Marchand. My Blackfoot name is Natawapim. I'm from Quebec, living in the West for the last 10 years, either in the US or in Canada. And I've been really, the Buffalo kind of took me under his coat, and I've been working on it and working and reintroducing in Banff and working with the Buffalo Treaty. And as Tasha said, there's so many great people who are doing amazing work. So this will be our interview number one of a series of the Buffalo Treaty signatories. And for this, I'm really pleased to have Jason Valdez from the Eastern Shoshone tribes with us this morning. Jason,
introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. I'm Jason Baldus. I am a member of the Eastern Shoshone tribe, and I reside here on the Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming, where we share this reservation with the Northern Arapaho. I got my undergraduate and graduate degrees at Montana State University in land resources and environmental science, and throughout my academic career, I've focused on buffalo restoration or bison restoration, mostly to my own home here on the Wind River Reservation. I work on behalf of the Eastern Shoshone tribe as the representative, and we're a member tribe of the Intertribal Buffalo Council. And over the years, I've also been taken under the buffalo's wing, I suppose. The buffalo's been a big part of my own healing, and so as I've returned home after my education, I've worked as a tribal buffalo coordinator for the National Wildlife Federation's Tribal Partnerships Program, and I sit on the board of directors for the Intertribal Buffalo Council, and have recently joined the board of the Conservation Lands Foundation, all to work on this buffalo restoration concept to bring this buffalo back to our communities as a way of healing not only our communities, our families, our individuals, but also the land as a keystone species. Buffalo is very important in ecological restoration as well. So buffalo is a big part of my everyday life, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do education programs around buffalo and work with youth, and even during this challenging time of COVID, Zoom presentations and such to continue the educational component. So we signed on with the Buffalo Treaty up at Chico Hot Springs a couple of years ago, and we continue to partner and collaborate with our Buffalo relatives and our supporters of our Buffalo relatives. So I'm glad to be with you guys today.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I would want to start by asking you, how did you come to be doing this work? What inspired you to start working on buffalo restoration?
Well, I grew up with a biologist father, so he was in a unique position as a tribal member, but also as a federal employee. And in such, working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, made recommendations to the tribes here about our fisheries resources and our wildlife resources. And he made very controversial management decisions. Prior to 1984, bighorn sheep and pronghorn antelope were extirpated from the reservation. This was due to unregulated hunting. And if our reservation territory was as big as it was in 1863, it would have been a very large reservation. But all of our reservations were reduced due to encroachment. And so then the diminishment of those resources was a factor in that. One of his main decisions was to implement a game code, highly controversial, but what was predicted would happen did, and that was that if we set seasons and bag limits on our wildlife populations, that'll allow for reintroductions of extirpated species, but also the growth of those populations to a level where they would be harvestably sustained for harvest for our tribal members for food and sustenance. And that's what happened. In the 80s, I was a young child, but I witnessed the reintroduction of pronghorn antelope and bighorn sheep, and grew up hunting off horseback, spending a lot of time in the mountains with my dad, and understanding more about the lakes and the rivers and streams and the fish and the importance of the fish to our people here. And he actually, the longest running court case in the history of Wyoming is who controls water on the reservation, farmers and ranchers or Native Americans. And the Native Americans, we lost that battle. So we still have a lot to fight for here in terms of our fish and our water. But I had an opportunity to take a trip to East Africa with my dad when I was 18, and we traveled around East Africa and went to most of the major national parks. But one of the most influential experiences that I had there was to witness the wildebeest migration in the Masai Mara and the Serengeti Plains. That was pretty incredible to see 1.5 million wildebeest, drove for over 100 miles, and that's what we saw in every direction, along with about 30 other species. And that was pretty incredible, but what was more unfathomable to me was that was less than 5% of what the bison was here less than 200 years ago. So to have that type of a comparison for how many buffalo were here really drove me to understand more about what happened to buffalo, but what also happened in terms of history to our own people. And that was it. That experience really drove me when I returned home to understand more about that. So when I piddled around at home for a while, and then realized I needed to have a science degree, and so decided on Montana State University for the community there, but for the professors who supported what I wanted to do. That was very important to me, that I was going to work on a project or work on something that was applicable to my home community. And I found that support at Montana State.
Mm. So you spoke about the multiple roles that you have, coming from your nation and the different organizations and nonprofits that are working on this goal. What is the big goal? What is what is the hope for result of your work?
Well, I think it's mostly about bison restoration is about healing. It's about healing our communities. It's about healing our land, and it's fixing a wrong. What happened to bison is not only a Native American story. It's an American story. It's a Canadian story, Mexican story. That buffalo, that bison, was life's commissary for our grandmas and grandpas. It was the store that we needed to thrive in this place. For thousands of years, we had a wildlife economy that we depended upon, and we were wealthy because of the biodiversity of those species. And those species were utilized for food and for clothing and for shelter throughout the year in different places. Our territories were vast. And what was brought here in terms of the colonial ideal, Catholicism, Christianity, manifest destiny, the boarding school era, the loss of language, the outlaw or illegalization of our ceremonies. All of these things have led to the contemporary state of our people. And our young people, who make up a large majority of our communities, don't have our ties, don't have what the morals and values of what our grandmas and grandpas were working to instill. The language is still slipping away. We were not able to maintain our cultural identity when we lose our language. And so for us to be sovereign, to move into this next era, we have to have young people who are knowledgeable in tribal government, in our language and our culture, our ceremonial belief ways, and our connection to buffalo, because our buffalo is at the center of all of that. And so as we continue to try to reinstill some of these values, we have to ensure that there's a connection between our young people and our old people, and making sure that we have the best tools in our toolkit for making sure that our young people have a future. Our sovereignty, our land base is still being chipped away at. We're still losing these things, and like I mentioned, the water, the land base of our people is still under threat, and much more so a couple days ago with the last presidency. But hopefully, in this new administration, that sovereignty will be upheld. The self-determination of the tribes will be honored, and the federal trust responsibility will be met. And we went through 4 years of the erosion of a lot of these policies, and so I think the future looks good, and bison restoration looks good. I think similarly with Wind River, many other tribes are working on this similar approach, whether it's the Eni Initiative over in Pine Ridge, other tribes like the Red Lake Band of Chippewa, the Apache, Southern Ute. There's a lot of tribes that were buffalo people and recognize similarly that we have to create this avenue of understanding amongst the next generation and beyond, that buffalo is back. It's in our communities again, and it's up to us again to recreate that relationship. And we're like starting on clean slate. We know that buffalo is critically important because of who we are innately. Even Native American farmers and ranchers cannot deny the importance of that buffalo to their grandmas and grandpas. And so as we decolonize our ways of knowing and ways of thinking, we're also decolonizing the way we treat our land. And our young people need to know why.
Yeah, I mean, moving towards, the idea of, and remembering, our relationships, and it goes beyond our human relationships and is with, our relationships that we have with, those that we share the land with. And, I some of my work is about the impact that's had on us to have had them taken in the way they were. And, that sometimes that loss, I think, is even unacknowledged, right? With especially younger people who haven't heard the stories and haven't had a chance to connect with the buffalo. And so, when it does happen, it's really powerful. Mm-hmm.
One of the ways I think that we want to encourage this way of seeing buffalo is wildlife, because we have close to 1 million buffalo in the United States today. 90% of them have cattle gene integration, but they're also manipulated genetically. They're under commercial meat production. They're essentially ranched. There isn't generally the natural male to female sex ratio. So there's a the majority of buffalo in the United States are treated that way. There's less than 25,000 buffalo that are considered conservation buffalo. They are managed as wildlife. They're under natural regulating factors like predation and climate. They have the natural male to female sex ratio. So the number of buffalo that fit that criteria is still very, very small. And that's extended to about 20 or so individual populations. None of those populations meet the threshold to maintain genetic heterogeneity. We need 1,000 animals in those conservation populations. Therefore, we need increased places where buffalo are managed as wildlife, not farmed and ranched or treated like cows. We have plenty of those. Buffalo needs its rightful place as wildlife, right alongside elk and moose and bighorn sheep and pronghorn antelope, mule deer, white-tailed deer. There were 7 ungulate species here when Lewis and Clark arrived. Buffalo is the one that is treated differently than all of the rest. Yeah. It's generally utilized for monetary gain. It's commercialized. And that is a disrespect for my way of thinking. Because if we as Native people have this profound respect for this animal, we use it for ceremonies, it was life's commissary, it's in opposition to that respect level that we have. So buffalo needs to be managed as wildlife, and it needs to be managed on large landscapes in large numbers for that ecological integrity to improve. We know that plant biodiversity increases, birds increase, insects increase also. And so there's a whole host of ecological benefits when we restore these animals back to large landscapes. But we as human beings tend to get in the way of a lot of those things. You know, wildlife management is not about managing wildlife, it's about managing people. Because if you put the wildlife back in its habitat, it does just fine. It's the people that we have to manage. And unfortunately, it's even our own people.
Which maybe brings us to, the idea. So, the Buffalo Treaty has, several tenets, and research is one of them, conservation, but also education. And, maybe we can talk about that, like how, to integrate buffalo into our, daily lives as the, elders of the treaty have asked us to do so. How do we do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I carry around a buffalo box, and prior to COVID was in this classrooms quite a bit, working with school kids to let them have a hands-on learning experience with buffalo and many of the tools that we would make from those. So the carrying that buffalo box into those classrooms and to those presentations was very. I think that has a big impact because kids really like to hold on to stuff and they like to learn about the bones and the stomach and the bladder and the ribs and the scapula and the hair and all of the parts of that buffalo and how they were used creates that connection. And sometimes we take cool kids out to the buffalo and we'll collect a bit of hair and we'll give them a little bit of that hair as they leave. And whether it's a little tiny piece of hair or whether it's being able to touch a buffalo horn or something, those are all little pieces of that healing that go out with those kids. They take it home to their parents and they tell the story and they hear about how important that was to our ancestors. Those are all things that couldn't have happened prior to that buffalo arriving just a few years ago. So it's already happening. And as we grow our populations to a level where we can begin harvesting them for education or harvesting them for ceremonial purposes, or when we grow a population large enough to draw a tag to hunt one, that's really all part of that learning process and healing. Once we can begin eating it and healing from the inside out, then we will see the benefits. Many of our tribal communities are going back to or encouraging a traditional form of diet. We realize that the high rates of diabetes and heart disease and other health-related issues are because of what we feed ourselves. And if buffalo was an option as opposed to, flour and sugar from the commodity program, or going back to eating roots and tubers or growing your own garden, then we have to realize that buffalo is, again, center of that healing. And so, I think school programs that are feeding kids buffalo is a great way to get that reintroduced into the young people's diet. A lot of our older people still prefer beef over buffalo, so we have to do these community feeds where we don't tell them what it is until after they eat it, and then they can reconnect again with that buffalo. But it's just a series of events that continue to reach out and expand from that buffalo, whether it's in that little form of hair or that child holding parts of that buffalo, or eating some buffalo soup. Those are all pieces of that healing.
And Jason, you're really interesting because you brought that other part of the Buffalo Treaty, as Tasha mentioned, is also health is a really important one in that healing. And you started to talk about your herd of buffalo that you have on the reservation. And I was wondering if you can bring us back to the moment when they came back and when did it happen, and the work to bring the buffalo and the change that you could see now after a few years in your communities. Remember?
Yeah, so it took several years to, get the Shoshone tribe to designate an area. We had to start small. We couldn't bring them in as a wildlife reintroduction because we're stuck in that paradigm of thinking we need to treat them like cows. So we started small so that we could get some here first, and just kind of continue to grow as we move along. But in November of 2016, we brought the first 10 from the Neil Smith Wildlife Refuge in Iowa. In 2017, we brought 10 more from the National Bison Range in Montana. And then in 2019, we brought 5 bulls from the Fort Peck tribes in Montana to share in those Yellowstone genetics. And we've had about 12 calves born since 2016. And, when that first hoof hit the ground in 2016, it was kind of a culminating moment when they were back. And it was kind of like a pretty surreal. You put so many years into this, and you kind of just think that it's going to not happen. Something's going to get in the way, but it happened. And, it's kind of like that healing. It's kind of bits of small victories. We're not to the point where we want to be yet, managing them as wildlife on hundreds of thousands of acres, which we have the potential to do. But taking a piecemeal approach, really to build the community support and understanding first before that, so that people can see them, people can go out and witness them. We can promote ecotourism. We can expand to an area which is essentially nearby our communities. So where the buffalo are now, to the south of them, is about 70,000 acres. It's essentially already contained by 2 highways and 2 rivers. The Northern Arapaho tribe also brought 10 buffalo in from the National Bison Range, and so they also have a seed herd that contains those pure genetics. And the hope and the intent is that the 2 tribes would combine our populations to manage them as wildlife under the auspices of our tribal game code and our law enforcement agency that already puts seasons and bag limits on our other wildlife. We'd like to, through raise money for a position that would, a law enforcement position that would be entirely for the buffalo as we expand to the 70,000 acres. That's kind of a 5 to 8 year plan, but really the intent is to manage buffalo on the hundreds of thousands of acres that we have, not only in the Wind River Mountains to the west, but to the Owl Creek Mountains to the north, 2 separate mountain ranges that both have summer and winter habitat. The best habitat that's even available is better habitat than what's even available for those in Yellowstone. So that type of a program would set precedent for what buffalo management can be on tribal lands. And of course, that trickles into what we can do on public lands, because being able to see buffalo first as wildlife, I think, is a major step. That's a paradigm that we're all stuck in. We forgot how to see buffalo. They haven't been part of our lives for 130 years. We still have to go to parks and refuges and private ranches to see them. And so we have to create a situation where we just allocate enough land for them. They exist and they can grow, and we can supplement the herd additionally each year or every other year with new genetics. And then we have the most genetically healthy population of buffalo managed on tribal lands as wildlife, not fenced in. And not a lot of tribes have that opportunity, but we do here if we as people can see the benefit of it. But we have to really educate our people in a patient and persistent way, and continue to persevere with that education. Then our young people will be at the time able to express their opinion about that. And it's because they learned so much about it previously from touching that buffalo skull or that hide or that bladder, and that's the connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the dream, right? That's the hope that so many
that's
are.
The hope.
Yeah, it's definitely a shared dream to see them as wildlife in many, many jurisdictions. It is one of those strange things that is a patchwork of the bison is the only species that is, depending where he is a patchwork. He has to be owned and fenced, or some few places are allowing to be, and to just be with the wolf, with the elk and the deer and the bighorn is one of the big issues we need to address. And it's all about how we want to see ourselves as a relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Is there any last things you want to share, Jason?
I think our stories are really important, and a lot of our stories talk about our relationship with our relatives, the animal relatives, the bird relatives, and the water relatives. And I think so many people have lost that disconnect to the pharmacy and the grocery store that grows all around us. And so any of the folks listening, I think that if we can find that plant or that animal or that food or something that we can retie ourselves to the landscape, I think that's very important. That we as human beings need to be reminded of where our place is. And we have a Shoshone story about how we acquired fire, and I think about it quite often because it's such a different perspective, not for us, but to educate people on about how we see ourselves and where we fall in creation. And it goes a long time ago when we still could visit, we could still communicate with the animals. And elk had gotten a rock lodged in his hoof, and there was a piece of flint. And as a way to dislodge it, he was striking at a tree and unknowingly hit another rock and created a spark. It's lit the tree on fire. And the elk thinking, I don't really need this fire, but I could offer it to my relatives. And so he said, I'll talk to the mice and the rabbits. And he said, to them, I got this fire. And they said, I don't need it because I don't need to cook my food, and I can run fast and I eat grass. And the rabbit said the same thing. No, we don't need it. And so the elk, he went to his other relatives, the wolves and the bears, and they said, no, we've got strong teeth. We don't need fire, and we can run fast. They said, why don't you offer it to those pitiful ones, the ones that only have two legs, they can't run very fast, and they've got no hair on their bodies, and they got no wings, they can't fly, and they have weak stomachs, and so maybe they could use it. So the elk, he went to the people and he gave them that fire so that we would be able to survive. And that story, teaches people about that relationship that we have with our relatives, that we use them, we eat them, we love them, but they're very important for us because we're just pitiful human beings. And I like that story a lot.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we really appreciate your time, Jason. And, as those of us who have been doing this work, I mean, we've had the privilege of connecting with people like yourself and others. And that was sort of the idea behind this, is that we, in this time of COVID, when we're all in our homes and in our spaces and our communities, that we use this time, to do that work, learning and as much as we can, with not being able, even sometimes in some cases, not being able to go in, back to community, that our people are in, spread across North America in different places, that this place, this site, this area, this time, we can learn and think and reflect, and when we are able to come back together, be stronger for it.
It's nice to have Buffalo allies.
It is. The Buffalo is a treaty of cooperation, renewal, and restoration. And I think we've talked about all of this in a beautiful way this morning to start the week. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thank you guys for the opportunity. Appreciate the time.